Hello, the purpose of this lecture is about acquainting yourself with ethics. Ethics is really the foundation to leadership. This is a leadership program. No matter where you are in the class, as a criminal justice practitioner, as a law enforcement practitioner, you have a major role on the lives of other people. Ethics does matter. I have done a lot of teaching over the country, and a lot of time, and they're challenging sometimes because people think ethics is a negative thing. Ethics is really a foundation. The goal of a leader, the goal of a partner, the goal of a practitioner isn't to find yourself in a position and try to get out of it. Is to understand what is ethically, what's right, what's morally right. And we'll talk about the difference. A good partner, by the way, as we talk about ethics, is really peer intervention. It's not covering up for my partner to do something wrong. It's keeping her from doing something wrong. The goal of a leader is to set standards of behavior and to mirror these behaviors and hold people accountable so they know what's right. So you have a major influence in people's lives. And in fact, in law enforcement, more people lose their job, fired not because of an incident, but because of unethical behavior. And more lives are lost of the consequences of suicide for unethical behavior. So this is a course on survival in so many different ways. What we're talking about now is the tools you're going to need later in the class to be successful, the concepts you will be applying. Because you'll be working in ethical dilemmas, several of them, and you need to understand the steps, and these are the tools. The first thing we're going to look at is Plato's dividing line, knowledge or truth. The first level is conjecture or imagination. A lot of times people know things to be true, not because they are, because it fit my experience, or everybody told me that's what the truth is. An example, you get mugged by a person, and therefore people of that race or people of that culture are all put in the same category. So you see something, and therefore your experience tells you that's the truth. Somebody referred to that as like the view from the mouse hole. This is not truth. This is your opinion of truth. The next one is actually more challenging. This is beliefs. My religion, my family, my culture all tell me this is what the truth is. Maybe it's about another group, or maybe it's about certain things. It may be about the police. I got stopped by a police officer and he treated me disrespectful, so all police officers are bad. Don't think this doesn't flow both ways. But beliefs, how do you convince somebody when they know it to be true because that's what their religion or that's what they've been told their whole life? Now, the dividing line is actually between beliefs and scientific knowledge. The next level is scientific knowledge. This is research. It's fact. It's empirical research. And the trouble with empirical research, it's very narrow. It's only about the subject we researched. It isn't broad. So it may be truth. Does it fit all similar situations? There was a lot of research done in the 60s about women in law enforcement. Is it true today? So research can be very time sensitive. And then the next one is reasoning, looking at it, looking at the facts, studying it, and coming up with the right answer. Now, Plato's dividing line separated between beliefs and scientific knowledge. He talked about those below the line were basically superstition and ignorance, and those above the line was knowledge and truth. A lot of the things we talk about, we all know to be true. If I tell the truth, nobody will come to save me if there's a problem. If I don't do this or don't do this, and there's no reality. It's what you've been told. So as we look in the program, as we look at as we study and look at some real life situations, we're going to try to take a look. Is it in fact true what you're saying, or is it that we believe it to be true? Which takes us to one of the key things with Plato's dual truths, the truth between the physical and the metaphysical. The allegory of the cave is what it is. And it's really, in the video you're going to watch in a few seconds, shows this. And this is an interesting concept. What it talks about is our reality is based on our experiences. And in the story, there's a group of prisoners, and they're shackled to a cave inside that they can just Verily behind them get some lights as they pass. And the only world they know is the shadow and the words that come from these shadows because of the reflection off the cave. And so they see it through a very tight lens. Now I want you to picture, this fits also those in a certain culture or those in a certain field that only sees it through a certain way or only hang around with the same people as yourselves. Can you start to see the world different? An example, you work in a very high crime area. And in this crime area, there's certain groups of people live there. And you only work nights, and that's the only experience you have. My example, I worked as a deputy sheriff for a while, and I worked in an area, and I worked nights, and the only people I saw at night were the people that were drinking too much in bar fights, and after a while you start thinking everybody was like that. Then I actually became chief deputy and started working days, and guess what? I met a lot of wonderful people in a different world. If I never switched, how would I see the world? So the allegorical cave talks about it. And the danger is then those that come out of the cave and then they see a bigger world and a different world and come back, how hard it is for people to accept. And as law enforcement changes, especially, let's take a look at one of the key. Community policing is a philosophy, a concept of working with the community together to solve problems. It has struggled. In fact, I hate to say it, I think it's a failure, not because the concept isn't right, because many agencies don't buy in it. They say they do, but in reality, it's like that cave. They don't believe it. They know how we've been doing it. We're going to do it the way we've been doing it, and we're going to claim we are okay, but in reality, we have not. And it's a major concept as we walk through. Okay, so let's take a look at goodness now. We're going to be taking a look at goodness. We're going to look at two kinds of goodness. And this is really an important concept as we move and start looking at values. Two types of goodness, the intrinsic versus non-intrinsic. Rules are, as we're going to see, an intrinsic value always supersedes a non-intrinsic value. So let's look at some examples. Intrinsic good. Good in itself, stands alone, life, liberty, integrity, truthfulness. A lot of these are values within themselves. They don't need another value. And then we're going to look at the non-intrinsic values as we look at it. These are goods that are only valuable in connection to another value. In other words, money has no value unless you can buy stuff. Loyalty is it's a non-intrinsic value. It's only good depending on why you're loyal and who you're loyal to. So a lot of the things as we're going to look at these values, they really don't stand alone and they're only connected into another one, which is really going to help us, a key concept. When we look at ethical dilemmas and we say an ethical dilemma has to have a conflict and what values are in conflict. And typically, remember, a non-intrinsic good is always superseded by an intrinsic good. So, ethical conflicts. What are some of the ethical conflicts you're going to run into? Between the police officer and those they police. Between the community, or maybe the correction officer and those within the system. Ethical dilemmas are throughout an organization. Take law enforcement especially. You may in fact carry a gun, but your chances of using it, although we're going to train you, is very slim compared to the ethical dilemmas you're going to face, and yet we don't prepare you. And that's what this is about. The goal is to develop the tools you have and need so when faced with an ethical dilemma, you have the tools to draw upon, not act instinctively that cost you everything. To pause, to wait, because throughout an organization, and especially if you go into leadership, you're going to be facing ethical dilemmas all the time. Do you have the skills? All right. So in other words, so they're going to help you develop those. And work with ethics. Ethics is about the message when officers are treated unethically within an organization. What is the message brought out to those they serve? All right. So we're going to look at, if I'm in an organization and I'm treated disrespectful, is there a better, higher probability that I will then carry that behavior and treat others? So what happens in an organization has a huge effect on the community. All right. So why be ethical? I mean, why bother? I mean, even Socrates was this big thing. He talked about why just? Why be honest? Why be ethical? You see all the time unethical people getting ahead. All right. So we look at it. We are a relationship with the community, and it really reduces our effectiveness. when the police, in fact, become almost like the criminal. Because we can do what we want. We're entitled. There is no control. Ethical standards. I can do things, I hold you accountable, but I can get away with them. The effects in our job. It destroys the effectiveness of leadership. Department morale goes down. It has massive consequences that build. When I have students coming to me and asking me about agency, there's some agencies that truly have problems and some seems to be able to be above it. But, so ethics does matter. The last thing is, forever you got to watch your back for the knock on the door. I lie. I cover my partner. Sooner or later something happens and my partner gives me up or the truth comes out. All of a sudden, forever, that knock on the door. Will people find out? And it changes the whole environment. Now, I know you work really hard to get where you are, where you're willing to jeopardize it from then on. Ethics does matter. Overall benefit of the study of ethics, it has to be realistic ethics. Free cup of coffee, who really cares? I mean, really, who cares? I go into a restaurant, they give me a cup of coffee. Is that an issue? Now, here's the issue. I go into a restaurant and I demand a free cup of coffee. I'm entitled to nothing. So who cares? Well, let's go back to the coffee. How about the person gives me a coffee? Are there any expectations that he will get something or she'll get something from that if something happens in the future? Everything is a relationship. But a free cup of coffee, I've had people say you get something like a free cup of coffee, next thing you know you're out selling drugs in the street. No, that's not true. But you have to be realistic. But ethics, what we do on a day-to-day basis. Now, if you go in and it gives you the coffee, wants to talk to you, but the trouble is when not the coffee, but the person that demands or expects it. Ethics in the news is something I've had my students do. And one of them, they brought it in Florida, where a lieutenant, he's always going into the Starbucks and getting a large cup of special coffee. And they got a new manager. And the new manager said, no, that's worth a lot of money. And he'd come in 2-3 times a day. And then he threatened the manager about if you have trouble, nobody's going to show up. When it's all done, the officer lost his job over a free cup of coffee. And the coffee's not the issue. It's the entitlement that I'm entitled to something because I'm a police officer or I'm a correction officer, that I'm entitled to something that other people aren't, and you're not. And there's where the ethical. And the problem is sometimes when it's throughout an organization, everybody believes they're entitled. End focus thinking is, in other words, the end justifies end justifies the means. And we're going to talk about something later called it leads to noble cause corruption, which is a big concept we're going to talk about as we go along. Each of these will help you. Overall benefit, ethical thinking enables us to think about why we make the decisions we do. Instead of just making the decision, it gives a chance to say, and set standards. I had a young man come into my office and say, I think I'm in trouble. And I said, what happened? He said, my FTO, he said he did something and I backed him up and lied on the report. And now the truth came out. Well, when it was all done, the FTO got a couple days off and that officer, who was on probation, got fired. And still having a difficult time getting a new job. Never thought the consequences. Setting standards for yourself is going to be key. What is it you're willing to do? What lines are you not willing to cross? And don't be wrong, insignificant little things. The world isn't black and white, but you need to set the standards. Are you willing to lie? Are you willing to be dishonest? Are you willing to lie to your supervisor? How important is your integrity? Without thinking in advance how easy it is to violate and give something away you'd never sell. Ethical principles are ground rules of decision-making, not merely factors. Plenty of cases where too much force or somebody does something and you didn't get involved and stop it, and you're going to be liable. So the ethical principles are serious rules. And we're going to talk about some of the principles in just a second. All right. So remember, breaking the law and being unethical are not synonymous. Breaking the law may be unethical, but being unethical is not always about breaking the law. There's plenty, if you look at history, unjust laws. Ethics are far greater and covers a lot greater areas. Ethics. Ethics is not about what you do, rather is the study of what you should do. If nothing else that I achieve in this program is for you to understand it was wrong, but maybe you don't have the courage to do what's right, then I've been successful. Ethics is to know. Ethics to understand. Ethics is a study of right and wrong and good and bad. The ought, not necessarily the actions. Ethics is a philosophy that examines the principle of right and wrong and good and bad. Ethics. Kind of think of it as a compass to help you where you're going. To know and think about in advance who I am, what my values are, what matters to me. Because remember, every behavior you do, you work really hard to be who you are. You know, loyalty is going to be an issue we're going to talk about big time in a while. Everything you do affects multi people. So values, what are your values? What do you stand for? Ethics is a study of, it's a set of values. All right, now we're going to talk about some theories here.